Pushpin game, Adam. Tar Heels in Minneapolis for the first time in history, and they get out of there with a 19-17 win. This was everything you expect a first game to be. There were some weird things that happened, some messy moments, some mistakes by both teams. Mac Brown has said it a bunch that you lose this game more often than you necessarily win it. I definitely think Minnesota did some things to lose this game. That is not to take anything away from the Tar Heels because they did have to make plays and win the game. But this was a game of attrition almost, it felt like. Who was going to be able to survive this kind of very weird game? A game that started late. Weather was a factor. It was just a strange kind of evening around the game. I don't think Carolina leaves this game thinking it's played its best game of the season, although it is an indisputable fact that the Tar Heel defense performed at a level that I think should make you very encouraged about where the Tar Heels are going on that side of the ball. The Carolina kicking game was outstanding, not just Burnette's field goals, but the punt game, flipped the field multiple times in important ways. Carolina did what it wants to do on kickoffs, and that's put it in the end zone. The one time they didn't, had a young DB, Malcolm Ziegler, come and make a nice tackle to make sure Minnesota didn't get any extra yards in there. The Tar Heels did those things well. There's very clearly some work to do on the offensive side as Carolina tries to figure out what its identity is past the Sam Howell, Drake May era. They know part of that identity is Omarion Hampton, but they got to figure out how to complement him. Of course, there was the injury to Max Johnson, which, as Adam and I are talking, we don't know the severity of that, how that may factor in the rest of the way for Carolina. But the Tar Heels finished with more points than Minnesota, and that was all that mattered on this particular evening.
You didn't have to be better than Georgia Tech or Florida State or NC State on Thursday. You only had to be better than Minnesota. And I do think that whichever team lost, there as it got towards the end, you started thinking, well, whichever team loses is going to think, we had some chances, but we did some things that didn't enable us to win. But there was a lot of opportunities for the Tar Heels to be able to say, okay, well, this is why we lost the game.
Right.
The weather was weird. The kickoff got delayed. The quarterback got hurt. Some weird turnovers and bounces of the ball that were odd. And you know how it goes in an opener. You just lose a game like that. But the Tar Heels didn't lose a game like that. And I thought that was a credit to a strong second-half performance. And, again, we talked earlier this week about how the Carolina defense looked good against Minnesota last year. Mm-hmm. So you have to bear that in mind. But they just looked more competent.
Yes. Remember, Carolina sacked South Carolina, 9 times and had double-digit tackles for loss last year in the first game. They were unable to even come close to that kind of performance on a consistent basis. And obviously those numbers were comically high, but you get what we're saying here. One game does not answer the question necessarily. However, I thought, Adam, that what Carolina's defense did appeared to me to be more repeatable and just kind of very sound, solid defense than necessarily if they had gone out there and sacked the guy 9 times and had 16 tackles for loss. I thought Carolina was in the right place. I thought there were not maybe once or twice, but very few times where there was like a huge hole to run through. You didn't see Carolina just being completely out of the wrong area of the field, allowing for busts. They did a nice job against the run, particularly. Really, Minnesota only had 2 drives in which it ran the ball with any success, and those both came in the first half. They ended up holding the Gophers total offense to 244 and 78 yards rushing. And this is a team that wants to run it in Minnesota. Now, they were without their best running back, and certainly that plays a role. If Carolina didn't have Hampton, we'd be making that point.
No, we wouldn't, because we wouldn't be doing a pod today.
And yet, I still think, Adam, the things that, just, again, I can't say it any better than I think what they did are things that they can continue to do. And they were things that Jeff Collins said he was going to do. He said that he was going to play a lot of guys. The Tar Heels did. He said he was going to be multiple in the way that he approached things. The Tar Heels were. They were sound. Mac Brown said it afterwards how impressed he was with their gap coverage in the run game defensively, and said he had seen it, repeatedly during training camp. That kind of stuff, to me, is repeatable quality defense, and that should be exciting if you're a Tar Heel fan.
I think it's unlikely that Jahvaree Ritzy's going to get 36 sacks this year.
Well, if he wants to, that's fine with me.
But I do think it's encouraging that there's someone other than Kamen Rucker or Des Evans who has the ability to put pressure on the passer. And it did feel like that pressure was coming from lots of different places that kept Minnesota confused about what was happening, which I think is something people have been asking for. They were stout in the second half, got multiple 3-and-outs, got a turnover when Carolina needed a turnover.
Yep.
It's not the steel curtain.
No, it was not a perfect performance, but unless that was the first game that you've watched of Carolina football, you know that it was encouraging defensively from the past. And it was the first game. So you would hope that there's more to come. The
lack of bust to me is
that
really
I agree.
Stands out.
Yes.
Because that had become a hallmark, and that didn't occur. And the tackling for the most part was pretty good. You can think of a couple that you wish had been made, and that'll get cleaned up, or else you'll play some of that depth who get the chance to make those tackles. But overall, it wasn't like you walked out of there going, oh, the Gophers were just bouncing off of tacklers all day.
I tell you, Carolina was aggressive up front. I rotated a lot of guys through there. It just feels like the Tar Heels were really, really sound defensively, which is exciting. The special teams, again, Adam, it's not like nobody goes into a game pumped up for the punts. But we've talked about, Tom McGinnis was kind of thrown into action last year when Ben Kiernan was hurt, and Carolina was just not very good in punting last year. We've talked about it. They were near the bottom of the national rankings in net punting. And in this game, he averaged better than 49 yards per play. It was almost at 50 yards a punt. And had one where they pinned Minnesota deep, a great play by Huzzy to go down there and down the ball after the really nice kick by McGinnis. We'll talk about Noah Burnette, but he was obviously incredibly important in this game. And when you are a team like the Tar Heels are at this moment, where they're still trying to figure out things on the offensive side, you need to have those other things be good to give you chances to win, and that's what they did.
Yeah, kind of like on offense, I don't know that Minnesota special teams have that dynamic playmaker who really scares you. So I don't know that there was a huge threat, but the Tar Heels have been a threat to themselves sometimes in the past. And that didn't happen. And when you needed a big punt or to get a punt covered or a kickoff covered, it was. And that's what special teams is. It's basically don't mess up.
Yeah.
And the Tar Heels didn't. And when you win a 2-point game on the road, one mess up, it could be critical.
Adam, we mentioned Noah Burnette, and we had Noah on the pod last year after the Duke game and enjoyed talking with him. Go back and listen to that interview if you haven't heard it. It's a good one. And there's going to be kicks this year that maybe Noah Burnette doesn't make. But he only missed one all last year. And certainly know that he was a huge part of this game and this win. And if you go back to the end of the 2022 season, when Noah Burnette missed some important kicks, it happens when you're a kicker. The growth that he has shown from then until now, I think, is impressive. I was listening to his press conference. He went and met the media after the game, and he just talked about being more mature and going through some pressure situations, having some failure, having some success, continuing to work on his craft. And, to the point where it's a meme on the internet, college kickers, when you have a college kicker that you feel confident with, that does make a big difference. And one of his field goals was 29 yards, one that you would expect most guys at this level to make. A career-high 52-yarder with yards to spare, a 42-yarder, and then a 45-yarder with 90 seconds left with some pressure in his face, and all of them split the pipes. And again, right now with Carolina, I think still figuring out its identity offensively and the best way that it can be successful on that side of things. Having a consistent kicker who can get you points is a big deal. And this game, it's not the only reason Carolina won, but a big reason the Tar Heels won is they had Noah Burnette and Minnesota did not.
November 17th, 2023 was the Noah Burnette pod. Bow Wow was on that one too.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's a good episode. I really recommend you listening to Noah Burnette. He just sounded in that interview, I remember thinking like you could hear the maturation that had taken place. And that's always fun to see. And then it's even more fun to see when he goes out and makes 4 field goals in the opener and essentially wins you the game. There were some pressure kicks. There were some long kicks. There were some more normal kicks, and he made them all. And it's a luxury to have a good kicker when your quarterback's Drake May. It's a necessity when you're still figuring out exactly what's happening offensively, and it changes your offense. Carolina's got a really good running back that we're going to talk about. If you maybe don't have to throw it on 3rd and 9 from the 30, and you can hand it off to Marion Hampton and see if he can make something happen because you feel good about your kicker, that limits your mistakes, which Carolina's going to need to do.
So we've taken the long road here to the offensive side of things, Adam, and Carolina has been so good offensively the last 5 years, pretty consistently, and they were at least yardage-wise one of the top 10 offenses in the country a year ago. They, of course, had a terrific quarterback, and we know how awesome Drake May was for Carolina and hope he will be. It looks like he will be for the Patriots. The Tar Heels finished this game with 252 yards, so that's not a ton. They really had a tough time finding a rhythm in the first half. I thought in the second half they were much, much better. I don't know if that was purely halftime adjustments. I don't know if that was, okay, everybody, let's take a deep breath here. That was not our best first half. Let's focus in a little bit more. We're better than that. But they seem to find a little bit more of who they wanted to be. And then Max Johnson got hurt. And so then you had to adjust again. And, Connor Harrell came in, and he only threw 4 passes. Now, one of them was one of the biggest plays of the game, that pass that he threw to J.J. Jones for 32 yards that set up what eventually was the game-winning field goal. And, again, we are unclear as of the time of Adam that we're talking right now. We don't know if Max Johnson's going to be back next week, going to miss a month, going to miss the year. Have no idea. Certainly hope it is on the shorter end. But I think Mac Brown said it right in the postgame, Adam, which is let's just assume that Connor Harrell is going to be the quarterback, at least for a game or two. Carolina needs to figure out how it can be most successful offensively using his skill set. We know that Tar Heels have a terrific running back. Hampton, if you just looked at the numbers, they're good. 30 carries, 129 yards, so you're over 4 yards a carry. So even just looking at that, you'd say, oh, he had a pretty good game. I think you had to watch it to really appreciate how good his game was. because there were a lot of 1 yard runs that he made 4 yard runs, or negative 1 yard runs that he made 2 yard runs. That maybe it's none of that super exciting, but he kept things moving forward. And so you have that. You've got some really good tight ends. You've got some receivers, I think, that are still trying to figure it out a little bit. So how do you best build that offense around that? Now, hopefully Max Johnson is not injured in any way that will cause him to miss a lot of time, and you still feel good about having both those guys available and feel like you can win with either one of them. But I think that, to me, is one of the important things for Carolina moving forward, is just figure out what do you want to be with the skill set that you have. And if you feel a little better about your defense and you feel better about your kicker, maybe you have to do it in a different way than you've done it previously, but there are still ways to do it. And you saw that on Thursday night.
It's a lot easier to feel this way when you have a stalwart who you feel like you can hand the ball to and is going to get some yards. And Minnesota learned that.
Yep.
Could the Tar Heels get a little more diverse? I would say yes. The receiving game basically consisted of Amarian Hampton, who's a running back, J.J. Jones, who had some big catches and had a couple drops that he wishes he hadn't had. Bryson Nesbitt caught a couple. Jake Johnson caught one. So no other wide receiver caught a pass. They didn't get the ball thrown to them very often.
Yeah.
Now, is that a factor of them not being open, or is that a factor of the quarterbacks not finding them? I think that's open for debate.
Yeah, that's one of those where I have not rewatched the game. I will be interested in doing so to see that answer. You know, what was happening on the back end for Carolina with the receivers. And I think it's hard to have a great feel for how that O-line played also until you watch it some more. I think just on the first viewing or watching it live, it felt like the O-line had some really nice moments, and then there were some moments that weren't as good. But they were also going against a good defensive front, and this is an inexperienced group. Remember, they only had one guy who had really started for them a year ago. So I don't think that's unexpected. And Mac Brown said it, I think it was on the radio show this past week, where he basically said he really felt like this was going to be a really good offensive line. It needed to play some together and start becoming a unit, which you can only do by playing games. But all of that, I think, and the coaches, of course, are already deep into this process, but just kind of figuring out all those different pieces of it, of what did work, what didn't work, why didn't it work, and how do you try and make it work moving forward.
And the good thing is the schedule presents the opportunity to do that, especially over these next 2 weeks. Amarian Hampton carried the ball 30 times on Thursday night. If that number could be below 20 each of the next 2 weeks, and ideally maybe more like around 15 in each of those games, I think that means Carolina's moving some pieces around to try to see what might be a good complement to him, because he's a known quantity. And in theory, the schedule allows you to do that. And so these next 2 weeks, they're not scrimmages, but they are opportunities to see in game action, what else do you like offensively? Because the Tar Heels do need to find something else offensively. They got to score touchdowns.
Yeah.
All due respect to Noah Burnette, I love watching you kick field goals, but touchdowns are more fun, and they help you win more. So the Tar Heels got to figure out a way to get the ball in the end zone, especially against the better teams that they're going to play at. Minnesota, I think, is kind of in the middle of the teams the Tar Heels are going to play.
I agree. At the end of the day, and I said this on the postgame several times, Mac Brown in our pregame conversation said when you go on the road, you got to take your toughness, you got to take your run game, you got to take your kick game. And I think that's what won Carolina this game, was its ability to run the ball with a terrific back, its ability, it's almost flawless performance in the kicking game. And the Tar Heels were tough. There is no doubt that Carolina had plenty of opportunities, as you mentioned earlier, to throw its hands up and go, stupid weather, stupid injuries, stupid weird bounce of the ball. We're going home. And they didn't do it. They kept going to the end. Did they get some breaks? Absolutely. But they went out there and won the game, and that is all that matters.
I don't know that you could have had a really good season losing that game. But you've given yourself the opportunity to still do it if you fix some things that you identified on Thursday night.